Good
Hello.
afternoon.
Thank you for joining me. Now, Seanergy is obviously a truly international event and conference, but sometimes it's good to go back to the roots, and that's what we're going to do now. We're going to have a look at the home market, France. And for that, first of all, Alexandre Roesch, you are Deputy Director at French Industry Association CERH. Jean-Gabriel, you're Senior Manager Energy Transition at Ernst & Young. First to you, Mr. Robert. Could you give us an overview of the French electrical mix? What does it consist of, and what share do marine renewables and offshore wind energy represent so far?
So when we look at the French power mix, the key document we look at is the pluriannual energy plan, the PPE. And the key point is that the PPE in its current state has been elaborated in 2016 and revised in 2018. So obviously, it does not take into account a series of events that have happened ever since. Mostly the increase in power market prices that we've seen since fall 2021, but also the reduction of the load factor of our nuclear assets since last year. And obviously, last but not least, the consequences of the war in Ukraine and the difficulties to secure natural gas supply. So there is a growing concern about the fact that these projections must be revised. And interestingly enough, the grid operator, RTE, released a paper recently to emphasize on these aspects. And the first point that they mention is that there is a growing consensus about the necessity to massively increase our capacities to produce low-carbon electricity, mostly because we are having increasing demand for the industry, because we want to relocate industries in different sectors. It's part of the policy that the government is pushing at the moment. And also because electrification is one key aspect of decarbonization for our industry. So a growing demand, as the grid operator said, we expect that the power demand in France would be about 640 terawatt-hour by 2030, which represents a 25% increase in comparison with the power demand that we've seen over the past 5 years in average, and a 40% increase if we compare with the power demand that we've had for the year 2022. And so, of course, nuclear will be part of the response to satisfy this growing demand with the Flamanville project that we expect for 2024. But renewables obviously will play a key part, and solar PV and offshore wind, given the reduction of costs that they've seen over the past years, will be instrumental in meeting this objective. So massively expanding the capacities for solar PV, for offshore wind, shall be a no-brainer at the moment in France in the current context. And so this is what we expect to see with the revised version of the PPE, of the pluriannual energy plan. This has been repeated by the ministry, Agnès Pannier-Runacher, this morning. We expect offshore wind to represent at least 18 gigawatts of capacity by 2035, while in the current version of the PPE, it was limited to 5 gigawatts for 2028. So it will be a real acceleration for this sector.
So France has great ambitions, but when we look at the micro level, Mr. Roesch, which projects are already up and running when it comes to offshore renewables?
So right now, good morning, good afternoon, sorry, everyone. Right now we have 8 gigawatts of projects which are at different stage of deployment. We have only one project built and connected to the grid, that's Saint-Nazaire. But if you look at the pipeline, we will have other projects coming up by the end of this year. We have actually 6 projects under construction right now. Saint-Brieuc, Fécamp, probably also fully built by the end of this year. Courseulles-sur-Mer, and then we have 3 projects of pilot farms, floating pilot farms in the Mediterranean Sea. So that's the next ones, and then we have 4 projects under permitting procedure. Yeux-Noirmoutier, Dieppe-le-Tréport, Dunkerque, and what we call Centre-Manche number 1. And finally, we have also 5 ongoing tenders. And there I wanted to highlight that among those tenders, we have 3 projects for industrial floating offshore wind farms, which will probably be the first commercial offshore wind farms in the world. So that's in South Brittany, in the Mediterranean Sea. And then we have 2 other projects for fixed offshore in Oléron and in Centre-Manche number 2. So basically that's the situation today. We have 8 gigawatts at various stages of deployment, probably 3 farms connected to the grid by the end of this year, beginning of next year.
And the first few projects are mostly around 500 megawatts, right? And the next ones will get bigger, up to 1 gigawatt.
Indeed, we've started, let's say, with projects around 500 megawatts, and the idea is to come up with bigger projects. So if we look to the future, as it was just mentioned, we have, like in the UK, signed last year in March a sector deal with the government. So basically the offshore wind industry and the government agreed on new objectives for the medium term. And we know that we will need this additional electricity for the next 10-15 years, because the new nuclear capacity will in any way not be able to ramp up so quickly. So we have agreed to add 10 additional gigawatts fully built and connected to the grid by 2035. So that will mean 18 gigawatts. And then we have more ambitious plans for the period after 2035. The president and the government announced an objective of at least 40 gigawatts by 2050. But we know that indeed with the recent models, we probably be able to build, and we will probably need even more than that. So for the next steps, basically, we now, next year will be crucial for this ramp up. We will see bigger tenders. We, in the French Renewable Industry Association, we believe that we need a mega tender of around 10 gigawatts. But before that, like in other countries, we first need to identify all the slots where we will be able to deploy this capacity. So the good news is that we have adopted a law in France at the beginning of this year, which will this time ensure that we will be able to organize public debate for the 4 facades that we have in France, which means that it will be a very open and transparent public debate to bring visibility to all the users, in visibility on the calendar, but also on the areas where we intend to deploy these capacities. And we hope that this exercise will end up by next year, by end of 2024, so that we then are able to launch a new mega tender in 2025.
You mentioned the goal of 40 gigawatt by 2050. I understand it could even go up further to up to 60 gigawatt by 2050. Does France has enough space for that off its coasts?
Yes, of course. We actually have already tried some exercise internally in the sector. And to give you an idea, 40 gigawatts, it represents approximately 50 farms. It will occupy less than 2% of the total maritime area. So it's not a question of do we have enough place, it's a question of where do we put them so that all the users of the sea, of course the fisheries and so on, will be able to continue their activities, because that's a specificity for the French first farms. We continue fishing in the offshore wind parks in France, and we design the different parks so that fishing can continue. And of course, as you can imagine, we intend to continue ensuring this cohabitation between the various users of the sea. So it's not a question of do we have enough place, it's a question of how do we get there to make sure that the biodiversity, the other economic activities of the sea can continue, but definitely we have enough space.
Jean-Gabriel Robert, with such an offshore wind energy boom ahead, do you have any figures for us? What kind of economic impact on jobs and GDP that could have for France?
So yeah, it will depend on choices made by the industries when they will develop the new parks, of course. But we can already have some orders of magnitude. According to the Marine Energy Observatory, the offshore wind sector for year 2022 sustained around 7,000 jobs, direct jobs in France. It's a growing number, of course. And there have been 3 billion euros investment throughout the year 2022. So if we want to achieve the ambitions that have been mentioned by the government, have 18 gigawatts of offshore wind installed by 2035, it means that we will have to reach 2 gigawatts being installed per year approximately. And so we can estimate that with that level of effort, we shall have around 20,000 jobs for this sector, and we shall have around 5 billion euros being invested every year in this sector. So yeah, it will be an important uptake expected for coming years.
Right. Interesting times ahead indeed. Thank you very much.
Certainly. Thank you.
Thank you both
Welcome.
of you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.